Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. Today we are continuing on our mini-series on France and French wines. Today's episode is all about Muscadet. So the first stop for my husband and I after Paris on our trip to France last month was the city of Nantes, where our friend Alex, who we'd actually met back in Seattle in around 2018, I think, where he lived. He'd moved out there in 2019 and just stayed there, loved it. So he showed us around the city of Nantes and actually helped us book the tasting that I'm going to tell you more about at the end of the episode. Nantes is the fifth, or according to Alex, sixth, depending on the day, largest city in France. It is also the closest city to France's Muscadet wine region, which again, we are going to talk about. The plan is to start with a little intro to Muscadet, and then I'll share more about the extraordinary tasting that we did while we were there. And good news, the wine that we tasted is available around the world, so it's not like you have to go to France to try these wines. Okay, let's start with the basics. Let's cover the region of Muscadet. So this region is the westernmost region in the Loire Valley in France, which is already in kind of like north central, northwest France area. Whereas most regions start as a larger general region and then their smaller subregions get recognized, Muscadet was actually the opposite. The French authorities officially signed off on the subregions of Muscadet-Sèvres-et-Maine and Muscadet-Côtes de la Loire in November of 1936. It wasn't until nearly a year later, in September 1937, that they officially made the general Muscadet AOC, which kind of grouped together all of the extras. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. We'll cover each of those subregions in just a moment. When we're talking about Muscadet, what is important to know is that they make wine from primarily one grape. And that grape didn't even originate in Muscadet. Instead, it comes from Burgundy. The grape is known as Melon, and until recently, it was actually known as Melon de Bourgogne because of its origins. Essentially, Melon wasn't as malleable as Chardonnay. It created wines with high acidity and decent fruit, but nothing spectacular in Burgundy compared to what Chardonnay did. So it traveled west, and then it made its way to the people of Nantes, and it was clear that it had found its home. The grape has a natural hardiness to cold weather, which this region is certainly known for, and it produces really beautiful wines on the region's unique soil. So as I mentioned, the grape is called Melon, and it can no longer be called Melon de Bourgogne, which is what it was known for the longest time. As of 2011, there has been, like a law put in place that you can no longer use the term Bourgogne, or winemakers can no longer use the term Bourgogne on their labels, even when they're saying what the grape is. The people in Burgundy did not like this and felt like they were trying to associate with their region. So you will see it labeled as Melon B, like just the letter B now. Muscadet wine is known for being the perfect pairing for oysters because of its high acidity. And the other thing I'll say about this wine, it is incredibly affordable for some just like stupid good wine. Like I don't have a better way of saying it. It is just really great wine. Now, a quick note on the word Muscadet. I keep talking about the region of Muscadet, but the thing is, this term doesn't actually come from the grape or even the region originally. Like there's no town or city called Muscadet. It actually comes from the wine's occasional musky aroma it got as it traveled from Burgundy to Nantes. The wine became known as Muscadet, and so when a region was created, Muscadet became the name of the region. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. Now, remember we talked about the sub-region. So there are 3 sub-regions in Muscadet, and one of them is the one that you're probably the most familiar with and what you'll see on wine labels the most. So starting off with the lesser known, you have Muscadet Côte de Grandelieu. Again, I still don't speak French. I'm trying with these, but it is just not my forte. But so this is a Muscadet Côte de Grandelieu. This is a very small appellation. It was formed in 1994 around a very large lake. You're not going to see this outside of France very much. So if you're there, keep an eye out for it. If you see it, give it a try because you're not going to see it outside of the region. Other than that, just know smaller region in the region of Muscadet. The next one is called Muscadet Côte de la Loire. And you will actually, something that's unique about this region is you will find a tiny bit of red wine and rosé in this region, which is unique to the other 2 regions that really only make the Melon white wines. And in case you're curious, the grape that is used for the red and the rosés is Gamay, which makes sense. In the Loire Valley, you see a lot of that, either Gamay or Cabernet Franc in these regions. And again, this one, the Côte de la Loire, has been around since 1936. Now, this last one, this subregion pumps out about 80% of the appellation's wine, and that is Muscadet, Sèvres, et Maine. And the meaning of that subregion is that the wine region is between 2 rivers. And what you'll see on the label is not just the Muscadet, Sèvres, et Maine. You'll also see written after it Sur-Lie. This is Surlie. And you're going to see this on the other ones as well. I'm just thinking of this one because I see this one the most frequently myself. But that Sur-Lie at the end means that the wine was left in contact with the lees of the wine from March to November. And so the lees, and when we spell it in English, it's Lees, the lees are basically dead yeast. And I know that sounds weird, but there's nothing like gross about it by any means. So if you remember the fermentation, the way that wine is made, the way we get grape juice and we turn it into wine is that you have sugar that is in the grape juice and you either introduced yeast, just like adding it like you would when you're making bread, or there's actually yeast on the outside of the skins of the grapes or just in the air in the winery in general. So you introduce yeast into the grape juice. The yeast eats the sugar. It continues to eat the sugar until there's no sugar left or it has gotten full. That'll happen only if you have a lot of sugar. But at some point, the yeast dies and it typically falls to the bottom of the barrel or whatever they're making. A lot of times you're going to pull the wine off the lees at that point. Because the thing is, the lees can cause the wine to become overly acidic or add some funky aromas. The thing is, if you do it with the right wines, if you leave it in contact with these lees, and it's the right wine to do this, it creates a really beautiful wine. And what it does for this Muscadet, so Melon, it's known for being incredibly acidic. Melon, remember, is the grape that we use to make Muscadet. It is very acidic. And so by leaving the wine on the lees, it's actually adding this kind of rich mouthfeel to the wine, along with some kind of aromas of brioche or bread-like kind of yogurt area. So it leaves it from being, so just like bracingly acidic to giving it this really nice balance. And something to note here that I learned at the winery while I was tasting, Sur-Lie, there is a minimum and a maximum for how long the wine can be on the lees. So the wine can only be labeled Sur-Lie if it has been on the lees for at least 6 months and no longer than 12 months. Once it's above that 12 months, it can no longer have that designation on it. Wineries may choose to do this just because they prefer the flavor of the wine after it's been on the lees longer, but it's believed that that isn't quite representative of that style of wine, so they don't get to have that designation on it. They can still call it Muscadet Sèvres et Maine. They just can't add the Surly at the end. Okay, last thing before we get into the tasting is talking about the soils of this region. So you'd think that a region that makes just a single wine would be quite boring, but that is not the case in Muscadet. And that's going to be true, you're going to notice, as I talk about all the different wines that we tasted at one single winery. And a major reason for that is that the unique landscape and soils of the region make each of these wines that they make a little different. The region of Muscadet has the most complex geology of the entire Loire Valley. See, most of the Loire Valley focuses on limestone, and you're definitely going to find that here in Muscadet. But you're going to find a lot of different soils. There's basically like an explosion of different rocks. Like when we walked into the tasting room in the Loire Valley when we were tasting, or in Muscadet when we were tasting, they actually had just like piles of the different rocks that you would find in the vineyard, because this is what was so important and what made each of their Muscadet wines, all made with Melon de Bourgogne, or Melon B, as we're supposed to call it now, made each of them slightly different. And that's why it was so important. So as I go through the tasting, you're going to notice, or as I go through each of the wines that I tasted, I'm going to tell you what type of rock that wine or those grapes were grown in, because that's what they told me. So, all right, now let's get on to the tasting. So I was lucky enough to get to taste at Domaine Landron. And so this is Landron. And I'd actually tasted one of their wines once previously because my friend Alex, that we mentioned, who lived here, brought it back from America for my husband and I to taste when he visited, I think either earlier this year or last year. But I remember it was amazing. And so I was so excited to visit this winery. So just to tell you a little bit more about this winery, I'm just going to read a little bit of the historical timeline that they gave me, just so you have an idea of how special this winery really is. So the story for Domaine Landron began in 1945. This was about 20 years after the existence of the Muscadet Sèvres et Maine appellation, though that is interesting because I have 1936 and they have 20 years after. So maybe it was like they're counting before the French authorities officially made it a thing. But Joe Landron, who is the current winemaker, his father Pierre and his brother Julien made wine growing the main activity of their small family farm. From 1950 to 1975, they converted land that had been left uncultivated during the wars into vineyards. They swapped and bought land, thus building this viable wine estate. So in 1979, Joe went into business with his father and bought even more new plots of land. Now, in the early 1980s, Joe Landron and his father Pierre began selling directly to customers and exporting their wines abroad. So in 1988, they actually had their wine in Germany, the UK, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Not the US yet, but don't worry, they do make it here now. In 1987, there was an incident in the vineyard in which the vines were almost poisoned by weed killer. This was the trigger for abandoning the use of herbicides. So this was basically like their awakening for wanting to grow their vines and make their wine in a more biodynamic and organic way. In 1980, Pierre, Joe's father, took his retirement, and so Joe became the main winemaker. And in 2002, the estate achieved its first ECOS certification, which demands compliance with very specific criteria. So this is kind of along those lines of being organic and biodynamic. So now, in 2005, they use different treatments like horse manure, silica, valerian, stinging nettle, horsetail teas, and all these different things. The estate eventually joined the biodynamic wine growing movement, already followed by lots of estates in France and abroad. They were actually, Domaine Landron was honored in 2011 to get to use the Biodivin label and to become a biodynamic certified estate. So, as you can tell, that was a very, very long process for them. But the fact that this is something they highlight means it is incredibly important to them, and it makes an impact on the quality and the taste of their wines. Just really, really great. Okay, now, I hope this doesn't get boring, but I thought it would be fun to kind of walk through the different wines I got to taste. Again, these are all made with Melon, so just assume that. But they were grown in different types of soil, And there was also different types of winemaking. So my plan is, if you're up for it, I'm going to tell you each of the wines, and then I'm going to kind of go through some of my tasting notes that I had while I tasted these. And again, a lot of these are actually available in the US. Not all of them are, but a good amount are. So you can kind of take some notes and figure out which ones you want to try. But yeah, hopefully you enjoy this part. So I'm going to go through, I think we tasted 6 or 7 wines. So I'm going to go through, and I'm also going to tell you, so what's something that's really interesting when we were tasting these wines, they never told us tasting notes. Like they never had us try it and then said, or even like when they were introducing it, like, this is this wine. You can expect it to taste like lemon and pear and almonds. And it wasn't even written down in like the little brochure that they gave us. No, what was written in the brochure was what soil were the grapes in and what food would you pair it with? Because that's the thing. I think that's something that I learned while I was in France as well. You know, we definitely care about what the wine tastes like, and coming up with these tasting notes, that's not necessarily the thing that's most important to the French people who, again, are like kind of our founders of the wine, the modern wine world. So just something to keep in mind. And I'm also going to share with you those food notes that they have in this brochure. Okay, so as I mentioned, Domaine Landron, this is where we got to taste. They have, God, what do they say? 45 hectares of grapes. 90% are Melon. They do have 10% of a total of Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and a grape called Folie Blanche. I'd never heard of that grape before, but those 3 are primarily used to make a sparkling wine that we did get to try. Okay, first wine up, this is called the Amphibolite. Amphibolite. I'm probably going to butcher all of these names, and I'm so sorry. But this is kind of what I could tell was like their entry level. So this was a Muscadet Sèvres at Maine, which I believe all of their wines are, I think, unless it's like a wine that doesn't fit the appellation. So I'll let you know if it's not this. But this one, so in terms of the soils, this was in metamorphic amphibolite, which makes sense why it's named that, which is derived from gabbro rocks. Again, I've never heard of these things until I came here, and then they actually showed me what the rocks look like, which was very cool. Tasting note-wise, I wrote lime, citrus, wet concrete, white flowers. I noted that it was acidic, but just so smooth at the same time, just that perfect balance. They mentioned that this one had been 6 months on the lees, so it was considered a sur-lie. This is the minimum, and this is actually their earliest one. So this was the 2023 vintage. They didn't have a lot of other 2023 vintages. This is one of the first ones that they bottled because it's only 6 months on the lees. And of course, this is the one that's like easy drinking wine, ideally pairs with oysters or anything that has that salty oceanic flavor. Okay, wine number 2. This podcast is sponsored by VoChill. When you're enjoying a glass of wine, temperature matters. And you don't need to be a wine expert to know this. You know this the minute you realize you forgot to put the bottle of wine in the fridge, and now you're stuck with lukewarm Sauvignon Blanc that is the opposite of refreshing. You know adding ice cubes will just water the wine down, but it seems like it's your only option. Not anymore. I want to introduce you to one of my favorite wine gadgets, VoChill. This gadget is as simple as it is elegant. It will keep wine perfectly chilled in your own wine glass. No more clunky metal or plastic tumblers or ice in your wine. While this gadget is an absolute must during the summer months, I don't enjoy wine without it from June to September. It's also incredibly useful for those days when you're craving a glass of white or rosé, but you don't want to wait for the bottle to chill in the fridge. VoChill offers a stemmed and stemless chiller in multiple colors, so you're bound to find one that's perfect for you. They also make the perfect gift. I should know, I got one for my mom at Christmas a couple years ago, and she loves it. Head to vochill.com, that's VOCHILL.com, to get your perfect wine chiller, and don't forget to use code CORKANDFIZZ for 15% off your order. This podcast is sponsored by the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club. Interested in trying new wines, but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you love the idea of tasting wine live with me. If that's you, come join my Cork Crew virtual wine club, and you'll get to sip wine with me twice a month while I help you find new favorite wines. The Cork Crew is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. And the best part about this club, purchasing the wine is completely optional. Plus, all events are recorded, and you have access to the full library of recordings as a Cork Crew member, so you can always catch up if you can't make it live. Oh, and did I mention it's virtual, which means you get to do all of this from the comfort of your sofa in your PJs. No need to worry about driving in crappy traffic, finding a designated driver, or spending an arm and a leg on a taxi. Want to give it a try without the commitment? You're in luck. Right now, I'm offering a free class pass to anybody who wants to try out the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Tasting Club. With this pass, you'll be able to join a Cork Crew event of your choosing. No strings attached. I don't need your credit card. I don't need you to sign up for anything. You'll be my guest. Simply head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to get your class pass and be one step closer to becoming a member of the best wine tasting club around, the Cork Crew. I can't wait to see you there. Now let's get back to the show. This one's called La Louvetrie. This is Louvetrie. Again, Muscadet, c'est vrai, man, 100% Melon B. It's so funny seeing Melon B instead of Melon de Bourgogne, but they literally can't say that anymore. This wine was in sandy clay, again on the amphibolite and quartz, and a different type of rock called Gneiss rock. It's a Gneiss. In terms of flavor for this one, I said very light. It had this kind of pale lemon, floral, herbal note, almost reminded me of a Sauvignon Blanc. I thought it was lighter and a tad more acidic than the first one, and this makes sense. They mentioned that this wine in particular is made from very young grapes. This is their newest parcel, so those grapes are still kind of finding their own, and they had it for 10 months on the lees. In terms of their pairing suggestion, they said traditional shellfish pairings and also suitable with other fish, and even listing sushi and sashimi as options. Okay, our next wine was the Clos la Carisse. This was actually a 2023 as well. So that other one was a 2022. So it's a little bit more age on it, but because they were younger grapes, still pretty coming into their own, right? So this was a 2023. This was a special one. It's only made in certain vintages. That Clos, C-L-O-S in the beginning, means that the vineyard itself is enclosed in walls. And this is actually true in Burgundy too, that we learned that if you ever see a village name or a vineyard name, I guess probably more a vineyard name that start with C-L-O-S, it means like enclosed, that vineyard is enclosed in walls. These vines, now this is like the opposite of the other one. The vines that were used to make this wine were 60 to 70 years old. So they had a lot more age, which also means that the wine itself has more aging potential. I forgot to mention earlier, Muscadet is honestly a great wine to drink right away. You don't need to age these, but some of them can age. So starting with this one, they said it has an aging potential of about 3 to 5 years. So you don't want to hold on to it too long, but you can give it a little bit of time. So this wine, they said it focuses on this tension, elegance, and focus. And it's kind of their quintessential example of Muscadet. It's grown on a soil called orthognous, which sounds a lot like the Gneiss rocks that we talked about. Tasting note-wise, this was a favorite of mine. I put a really big smiley face next to this one. It had this lemon curd, yogurt, lemon cream, melon, and then this like herbal tarragon flavor that was really nice. This had 8 to 10 months on the lees, and they recommend pairing with this with a smoked fish dish of some kind. Something that we talked about at a lot of wineries, not just this one, was that 2024 was a really, really hard year. In fact, they won't make this wine, that Clos la Carisse, for 2024 because they did not have enough grapes. There was just so much rain that happened in 2024 all across France. Like we heard this in Muscadet, we heard this in Beaujolais, we heard this in Bourgogne, and also in Jura. There was just so much rain, and so there was this fungus that developed, and that fungus started by attacking the leaves, then the grapes, and then the vines. And all they could do was spray to try to protect from this fungus, but every time it rained, it would wash away the spray, so they'd have to do it again. I think the place in Beaujolais told us that they sprayed like 19 times across the summer, and it still wasn't enough. And then here in Muscadet, a second fungus developed after that. So they were only able to harvest about 7 of their 45 hectares in 2024. So definitely going to be a harder year for them. So if you see these wines, go support them. And it doesn't mean that 2024 will be a bad vintage. In fact, it could produce a really wonderful wine because the grapes are going to be so concentrated and because they have so few. But it could lead to higher prices on the wine because there wasn't as much made. The next one we tried was Le Houx, and this is LES space HOUX. Again, Muscadet Séveramin, 100% Melon. This one is considered a little bit more complexity on a more mature wine. We tasted a 2021, so this was one of the older vintages. I know that doesn't sound very old, but for Muscadet, that's what was getting there. And this one, in terms of tasting, I mentioned it had peaches, this caramel kind of marshmallow sweetness aroma, not taste, like it didn't taste sweet, but it had this very sweet smell to it and didn't have as much of that like minerality. And again, when I say minerality, I'm thinking like waterfall or wet rocks or the smell of the pavement after it's rained. That's kind of what's forward in a lot of these Muscadet wines. This one didn't have that, which makes sense when you learn that this wine spent 16 months on the lees. Typically only spends 12 months, but they tasted it after 12 and said, it's not quite there. We need a little longer. So they gave it a little bit more time on the lees, which developed those more unique notes. And in terms of the soil, this was sandy clay and quartz along with sandstone pebbles. Also makes sense. Those soils don't really lead to as much minerality in terms of aromas. And then they did mention with this one, when it's young, do it with shellfish like oysters, mussels, crab, lobster, scallops. With 2 to 5 years of aging, you can actually do this with a fish that has some type of sauce or even a more spicy cuisine could work well with it. Okay, moving on, we have the Le Fif du Bray. This is LE space FIEF space DU space BREIL. This one was a fun wine. So again, Muscadet Séveramin, 100% Melon B. Major difference in this one, 40 months on the lees. 40 months. That is, let's do our math, over 3 years on the lees. So we were tasting a 2020. The flavor in this one is so much more round. And then in terms of soil here, it's a filtering clay soil on the orthogonous and quartz rock. And this one they said is much more generous. And there is a discrete touch of oak with this one. So flavor-wise, I ended up getting like pie crust, roasted sugar, and this key lime flavor for the acidity. This one has more of an aging potential, can last up to about 10 years or even more. And this is a wine that they think is great with food. So they actually sell it primarily to restaurants. And they'll even do it when it's older too. So they are still holding on to a 1997 vintage of this wine that they will sell to a high-end restaurant when it is ready, which I think is just so cool. So if you're ever at a fancy restaurant in France and you see Le Fif de Bray from Domaine Landron, you need to try it because I'm sure it is just phenomenal and just something cool that you don't always get to try, right? Our next wine we tasted was Le Fif du Bray, and that's FIEF for Fife, and then DU space Bray, BREIL. Okay, this wine was a 2020, so it was a little older because it was aged for 40 months on the lees. And so this is going to give it that really nice rounder feel in terms of flavor. I got this pie crust, roasted sugar, and key lime for the acidity. So it had a little sweetness to it. This is a wine that they say is a little more finesse, focus, and elegance. Soil-wise, it was in silicious clay soil, quartz-rich orthogonous bedrock. And in terms of pairing suggestions, this is one that they love selling to restaurants because it can have a little age on it and gives it something a little bit special. They recommend sauteed scallops, fish, white meat, veal, even sweetbreads, poultry, and cheese. You can also have it with exotic cuisine. Not quite sure what that means, but hey, this is the wine to try. Okay, last one. This was the oldest wine that we tried and something really special. This was the Haute Tradition. This is Haute space and then like tradition. How you spell tradition, you know? This is a 2018, and this one was a little different. Still Muscadet Sèvres at Maine, but it has a touch of oak. So it was put in some oak, so 12 months in a large cask barrel. So not like your regular size barrel, but like a big one. And then it was finished in stainless steel for about 6 months. So this wine is going to be more generous, but it has this marked salinity to match with that oak. So it's not overwhelming by any means. This is kind of one of they consider this like their gastronomic wine. So if you love food, this is another one to go to try. In terms of notes, what I got, I had vanilla, cinnamon, lemon, and spiced pear. It honestly seemed like an amazing fall wine, like just what I'd want. This one also got a really big smiley face, so you can tell that I like this. In terms of food pairings, they recommended either like a paella or a curry, something with a little more spice to it. Or if you're going to do a cheese, go with a goat or a sheep cheese because it needs a little more flavor. Now, we did try 2 other wines that are not considered a Muscadet or a Muscadet Sèvres at Maine. The first one is called Melonix, so Melonix. This wine, the thing that makes it special is it went through a second fermentation. So the first fermentation is to make the grape juice into wine. You got to make alcohol. Second fermentation is called malolactic fermentation. And what happens is they take the malic acid that's in the grapes, and then this bacteria transforms that acid into a lactic acid. And this is the acid that's found in milk. So this is what can make a wine feel creamy and also give it that kind of buttery, creamy flavor or aromas. So this wine, they did use Melon, but they had it go through a second fermentation. And so with going through that, the wine is a little richer, but it still has that underlying acidity because it's made with the same grape. In terms of flavors for me or for aromas, I got toasted marshmallow, popcorn, and then yellow apple. This wine, they say, it's not meant to be aged. It's just kind of a fun wine to have and especially pairs well with charcuterie. Okay, and finally, the last wine that we got to taste was actually their sparkling wine. This they call Atmospheres. They do the traditional method, so it's the same way that they make sparkling wine in Champagne. This one was made with Pinot Noir and a grape called Follet Blanche, which I've never had before. I thought it had this really slightly sweeter kind of marzipan flavor with pear. It was very fruity and had this wonderful lasting flavor. There is no sugar added to this. So that sweetness that I'm noticing all comes from the flavor. This is considered a brut nature, meaning just like kind of natural. They did not add any sugar to it. Okay. And then the last one I want to talk about, we did not get to taste, but they told us about it. And I was like, oh my God, I got to tell you guys about it. This is a wine called Muscadet Premier, and it is released 2 months after harvest. And it's similar to a Beaujolais Nouveau. If you've never heard of this, it's basically like the first wine that is released of the season. It's like super fresh. It hasn't been sitting in the barrel very long. It's like literally like right after fermentation, and they're getting it in bottle and they're selling it out. This wine, it tends to be quite a bit fruitier, and we may not see it a lot here in the US because they sell a lot of this Muscadet Premier to Japan because it pairs really well with sushi. So fingers crossed we'll see it popping up in the US, especially now that Beaujolais Nouveau is getting more popular. But I don't know. We'll have to keep an eye out for it. Okay. Phew. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was fun to get to hear my tasting notes and learn about each of these wines. Like I said, Domaine Landron, which is actually Joe Landron is again the winemaker here. But I learned his daughter and her husband also work on the winery, and she will actually be the one that will eventually take over from Joe, which I think is great that they're keeping it in the family. They typically hire 40 to 80 people to pick in the vineyard, just to kind of give you an idea of like what the people are at this place. And they pick primarily by hand, but the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are picked by machine. So again, 45 hectares, most of that is Melon, and most of that is picked by hand, which is just like, mind blown. But okay, now I'm actually done. I promise. That's Muscadet. I hope you enjoyed this little intro to one of my favorite white wine regions. If you know a wine lover in your life that would enjoy this podcast, please share it with them. Find your favorite episode, maybe it's this one, and send it their way. Or take a screenshot right now and post it to your social media. It would mean the world to me. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I release new episodes every Wednesday. As for next week's episode, I'm still finalizing my guest, so I don't want to jinx it, but it'll be an expert in the world of French wine in one way or another. And I know you're going to love it, so stay tuned. Thanks again for listening, and if you want to learn more about wine, come follow me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram. And if you're interested in joining an incredible community of wine lovers and exploring new wines, perhaps like these Muscadet wines, be sure to sign up for my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew. You can actually come check out your first tasting in the club for free. Just go to corkandfizz.com/free class pass. Cheers!